Hello, I'm Bea Cupin. Welcome to Rappler. Today we're talking to Amnesty International Secretary General Salil Shetty. He's a long-term activist on poverty and justice and lead the movement's work around the world to end human rights violations. Today, he will talk about why Philippine policemen are still reported to use torture on crime suspects or witnesses. This is despite the passing of the Anti-Torture Act in November 2009. Today, December 4, Amnesty International is releasing a document that shows nobody has been convicted for these acts. Good day, sir. Thank you for joining us. The report that Amnesty International just released, Above the Law, Police Torture in the Philippines, it's disheartening to say the least. I'll just quote a passage. Although the Anti-Torture Act criminalizing torture was passed in the Philippines, torture is still rife and appears to be routine during interrogations in some police stations. So can you just take us through the main points that Amnesty found out in the course of the study?
See, torture is not new in the Philippines. There's a long history of this, and this is the fourth report that Amnesty International is bringing out on the torture question in the Philippines. But we actually worked very closely in some ways with the government for the anti-torture legislation, which was agreed 5 years ago. And Philippines is a signatory to the UN Convention Against Torture. They've actually come onto the optional protocol, which makes it even more precise. So on the legal side, everything is pretty good. It's like by international standards, it's pretty good. So we were very shocked ourselves that when we started investigating the on-the-ground situation, that there's such widespread use of torture by the police forces was as surprising and shocking to us as well. So we've done interviews of at least 55 cases, and as you start talking to them, they each tell us that there are so many more people they can introduce us to who are being tortured. So, and most of this happens when people are arrested on an irregular basis, what they call irregular arrest. So it's people who show up without even uniforms, and they say that you're going to be arrested. They beat you up. Often you're kept in secret detention centers. They're not, actual police stations. Or I'm sure your viewers will remember the case of the Laguna secret detention center, where about 45 people were detained, and 23 of whom complained of torture. So, but the most shocking thing is, 5 years later, there have been hundreds of cases of people complaining and not a single conviction as of date. And you can imagine that people are actually very scared to complain. So when somebody complains, it must be really bad.
So from a policy perspective, the law, there's nothing wrong with the law?
No, the law is fine. I mean, you can always tinker with it and improve it, but that's not the issue. The issue is actually that there's a lot of rhetoric and absolutely not enough action.
Why do you think it's so hard to, because like you said, the law is there, the sanctions are there, the possible sanctions are there, the Philippines even committed, has higher commitments to the international community, but why is it so difficult to actually stick to what the law says?
So, first of all, it's the police who are investigating the police. That's the system you have in this country. So unless you have an independent system by which people are actually investigating and prosecuting, this is never going to change, because it's, who's going to, they all have relationships, and they have, if they themselves are implicated, how do you expect them to be independent? So one of the clear calls we're making is that there needs to be a independent process of investigation and verification and all of that. So, and that's on the one side. On the other hand, you actually want to prevent this from happening. You don't even want to get to a point when this happens. So the prevention requires a kind of a national preventive mechanism, where there is a body who can actually go to these detention centers and make sure that torture is not happening. Again, people who are independent, capable, who can go out and make sure that the detention centers are not practicing torture, because right now you can physically see the bruises on a lot of these people, the cigarette butts. There are two cases which we have documented in the report. Jeremy Corey, for example, he's got electric shocks. And a woman, Alfreda, who I met in Paranake jail myself, she's been beaten up. Even her family and the people who are close to her are being constantly attacked. So, and there are far too many cases. It's not a a isolated case. So if the police claims that it's isolated, we had a meeting with the police this morning, and they themselves acknowledged that there is a problem.
But if you talk about a body that would go and check, this would be the Commission on Human Rights.
Well, it's in the human rights sort of language, it's what's called a national preventive mechanism. And it could be the Commission on Human Rights. The problem with it being the Commission on Human Rights is they're already struggling to do what they have to do themselves. For us, the important thing is that whatever the body is, it needs to be independent, and it needs to have the capacity to do proper, studies.
People might be wondering, why of all the countries, you did studies on 5 countries, am I that's right?
Yeah.
Why the Philippines?
So this is the thing about the Philippines, because the Philippines, given its history and its record, it is seen on the international stage and even in Asia as a champion for human rights.
Okay.
You have a president who, whose initial speeches were all about his commitment to human rights, but this time, he wasn't even keen on meeting us. So there's no point in denying the facts. There's no point in hiding from the reality. It's what's very and so one of our key calls is not technical. It's a call to the president and to the leaders of this country to say that there should be zero tolerance. They need to come up and say this is not acceptable. We are going to fix it. There are countries like Turkey, by the way, where there has been a serious problem of police torture. But once the heads of state and the highest levels say that they're going to fix it, it's not, once you decide to do something, you can find ways of doing it.
But we do hear our leaders saying that, in speeches, in so many, in press releases, in interviews, they always emphasize that, the PNP is trying to focus on, teaching the people on the field that it's not okay to do this, that we're changing. But
no, it's not a question of teaching. The fact of the matter is, it is widespread, and not a single police officer has been convicted to date. So that's why I'm saying it. When we say that the leaders should stand up for it, it's not a matter of making one more speech. We've had enough speeches, and let's not forget that most of these people who are being tortured and beaten up in the prisons, many of whom I met yesterday myself, they come from very poor backgrounds. And normally they're suspected of some small criminal activities. So already, there's a kind of the tendency in the police forces that if they're already suspected of criminal activity, you can do whatever you want with them. So, but Philippines is now an emerging economy. It's a country which is seen as a respected member of the international community. Then you need to have a rule of law. So even if somebody is suspected of crime, there is a judicial process. And in fact, it's very interesting. Many of the people we talk to, they are saying, yes, we've committed a crime, but that doesn't mean we can be tortured.
right.
So if you committed a crime, let's go through the process, the judicial process, let them be given the right punishment, but not these extrajudicial. Many of the cases, in fact, 2 of the cases that we interviewed were cases which started with torture, and that was extrajudicial executions. 2 of them were actually shot and they survived. And there's disappearances. So, it's a slippery slope once you go down this route.
You talk about confidence in the judiciary, but on the report it also pointed out that a lot of people are not confident in how the justice system works in the Philippines. So what kind of effect does that have?
No, it has a very negative effect. So, the other practical recommendation we've made is that now there's a morass of different rules and systems and arrangements. So if somebody is actually tortured or is worried of being tortured, they don't even know whom exactly to complain to. So again, you need an independent complaint mechanism. In fact, the police told us this morning that there are 11 different mechanisms. So even one mechanism is pulling in one direction, another one. So we've proposed, and many countries have an independent police complaints commission, and that works. And we are always reluctant to suggest newer and newer bodies and mechanisms. But the important thing is there needs to be something which is independent and seen to be independent by the public. And why I've called on the leaders to speak about this. In fact, I met senators. I've just come from the Senate House myself. The leaders, key leaders who are elected to the Senate, they also need to tell the people of Philippines that torture is not acceptable, because even ordinary people may have the view that if they're criminals, you can do whatever you want with them.
There's impunity.
Yeah, that's not the way to think about how a country which believes in rule of law should operate.
Right. In the report, there's a section that highlights the fact that highlights the Philippines martial law history. What does that factor into the situation now?
I mean, in sort of a subliminal way, I'm sure it does. But the reason why we focused on the police this time rather than on the armed forces is because there's lots of work we've done in the past about what happens when people are suspected to be involved with armed groups, and we're very sure that there's excessive use of force and torture in those areas of the country. But what we did was that if you take the actual complaints which were lodged last year with the Commission on Human Rights, the 70 cases or so, the huge proportion of that, at least 60 or so, are actually related to police torture and police stations. So that's why we focus on the police and the PNP this time.
Right. The numbers that the CHR tallies, are you confident that that's a reflection of?
It's hugely underreported. I mean, that's why I said, like when we started the research, our researchers, when they went and started talking to people, in 2 weeks we already had 50 names. So for the whole year, they've got about 60 or 70 names for 2013. People are very reluctant to, because there's a real fear of reprisals. So I mean, you need a witness protection program. There is one which has been installed now, but it's still really weak and struggling. So I mean, people absolutely don't feel confident.
There are certain groups who say that one reason why torture persists, especially the PNP, is because of its militarized background. During martial law, it was technically part of the Philippine constabulary, was part of the military. So would you agree with that?
No, there's no question that there's many reasons why we are in this situation.
Okay.
But in a sense, we're not looking back now. We're looking ahead, right? I mean, so what is the Philippines of the future? Is it going to be a Philippines where torture is the default option? Because most of the reasons why the police torture the victims is because they want to extract a confession.
Right.
Very often they want a shortcut. They just want to get somebody to confess, because the mainstream criminal justice system takes too long, 7 years, 10 years for each case. So they want to extract a confession, or they want to extort money. So I mean, these are the common reasons. But the only way, at the end of the day, the only way you're going to break this vicious circle is by ensuring justice and accountability. So this situation of 5 years and no confession, no conviction, no accountability, just has to end. And one of the things we're also proposing to the senators today is that next year, 5 years after the anti-torture legislation, it will come up for a review.
Okay.
It's a good time for a public inquiry to be held as to what is going wrong with the system, and some real action and concrete plans are put in place.
But what you're saying is this goes beyond the law enforcement of the Philippines. The judiciary also has a responsibility to somehow.
I mean, the Department of Justice, what we need, apart from the points I mentioned, we need a very systematic and effective investigation process and a robust prosecution process in place. But at the end of the day, it looks like these people are ending up being shielded. Even in the Laguna case, which was most recent, there's a big uproar in the country, but not a single conviction.
Is it because people are so easy to forget?
I mean, public memory, we're always told, is short.
Yeah.
But at the end, but a system, you have institutions which are meant to make this thing happen. The Senate has an oversight committee that's not even, it's met once for the anti-torture legislation. So we have systems which are set up are not functioning properly. We need to make sure that they start operating properly.
You mentioned you've been meeting with officials. Based on those meetings, is there resistance, or what's stopping politicians, public leaders from pushing, telling the PNP that this isn't okay, we have to change how things are, what the things that's going on?
I think what has happened in the Philippines is this has just become part of accepted reality, that torture happens in the police station. For those who are in the inner circle, who are in the know, I think they just take this as normal. And for the average Filipino person, they probably don't actually even know that this is what happens, because how many people end up in police stations? Not everybody who ends up in a police station. So when you tell these stories to the average Filipino person, they're always shocked. So apart from what we're doing in terms of the report and the research, we're also now running a public campaign. Actually, there are billboards on the streets now talking about this. We're going to have more coming into the newspapers as well, like inserts. And we're running campaigns where people actually know whom to complain to if they're tortured, simple campaigns like that. And also, we, as part of our global campaign in December, which is when we have the Human Rights Day, it's a month where we have a letter writing marathon. So last year, 1.3 million people took part in it, and this year we have Jeremy Correa as one of the cases there. But I'm hoping that we don't only have to rely on people from outside the Philippines campaigning on these issues. I'm inviting your viewers to join. We have an Amnesty Philippines, amnesty.org.ph. There's no reason why they don't, because it's ultimately the people of the Philippines who has to solve this problem. It can't be solved from outside.
There should be critical mass.
Yeah, and if you can imagine, like in a police station, if there's a way in which you can crowdsource the information of where is torture happening, and if Filipino people go to that police station and say, stop this, this is not the Philippines we want, I can tell you it's going to change.
Yeah. But one of the, I guess, issues that the PNP always raises, it's not just about torture, but like when they're criticized for an increase in the crime rates, the one thing is they're underfunded, or rather, they're not as well funded as they should be.
I mean, that is true. That is true. They're under-resourced. I mean, it's often said that as a proportion of the population, Philippines has a very low force, and which is why they end up using all these auxiliaries and informants and all that. But then it starts going into a gray zone. That a lot of the people who've been tortured that we met used to be police informants before.
Right.
So, I totally agree that the police need to be properly funded. They need to be resourced. They need to have the equipment. But you can't really justify torturing people by saying I don't have enough funding. I mean, it sounds a bit strange.
Yeah. That we have to resort to this.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're fully funded or you're zero funded, you can't torture people. That's not. It's not on. So.
It's non-negotiable. We talk about a lot of things, but there's the concern about it. It's we lack personnel in the PNP. Basically, there's a budget worry, but I guess what you're fighting against is a culture, or
it's a culture of impunity
and ignorance. I guess some is.
I mean, how can you say that when you're torturing somebody, you're electrically I mean, you can't say I didn't know I'm not supposed to do this. I mean, it's really stretching it. I mean, we're all for trainings. There's a new administrative order 35. There's a new prosecution group being set up. They need to be trained. But how long can people of the Philippines wait for torture to end? I think enough time has passed now.
Based on the report, which government institutions have we pinpointed that you think could, give that critical push?
It has to come from the president.
Okay.
There's no shortcut. This is a national shame. It has to come to an end. And the president needs to say that we're going to stop it. He has 18 months or so left. Yeah. This can be a legacy from his side to say, and he started by talking about human rights. So he should end by showing that human rights, he's serious about it. And then we have been quite precise in our recommendations. So if you want the Independent Complaints Commission to be established, then of course this is cross department. It's not just one. So that's why we need somebody like the president to say we're going to bring the pieces together. Otherwise, it will be distributed between so many agencies. We want something which is independent, which is pulling together the 11 different mechanisms which exist. The national preventative mechanism, this should be set up by the government again, by all arms, but certainly the Department of Justice has a very central role to play, and the Minister of Interior, the Department of Interior. So,
but we have a lot of institutions such as the National Police Commission. You have that. You have the PNP's very own internal.
IAS, the internal advice. I mean, that's part of the problem. And if you look at it, all of these are not independent. There is no independent oversight. No, so if they're going to be investigating themselves, we're going in circles.
Have you pinpointed why the Philippines hasn't been able to establish a truly because of the NAPOLCOM, the PNP chief sits as one of the commissioners. Right, the EAS is headed by a police general.
They're all internal mechanisms.
So how come we haven't? After 5 years, how come there
it's long overdue, and we apparently there's a bill under consideration which is likely to be put forward. So I think the thing is that the speed at which we're moving is simply inadequate. We should move fast now, and Amnesty International is very willing and open to help the government in whatever way we can. It's not just a matter of criticizing. So.
Of course, we talk about the CHR as well. How can the government help CHR?
I mean, CHR we are going to be meeting with CHR as well, but essentially they're under-resourced. They don't have the resources, the funding to do what they need to do. And the CHR is a constitutional body, which is very important.
Yeah.
And I think it was a good step for the Philippines, as a country to have an independent commission on human rights. But if you have a commission which doesn't have the resources, then we're back to the same conversation.
It's a toothless.
Yeah. I mean, it's done some good work. We appreciate it, but it needs to be properly resourced. Yeah.
Well, politicians would point out, Pinoy the president has exactly 18 months. Do you think he can still do it, given he has a lot of priorities lined up for the country? Elections are in 15 months, and
But hopefully this is going to be good from an election perspective. No?
Okay.
I mean, whoever is going to be running for the elections, if they say that we are going to change the image of Philippines in the world, we're going to prove Amnesty International wrong, that we have torture. We'll be happy to hear that.
Okay, let's just zoom. I just want to zoom out. In the bigger picture, Southeast Asia, how is the Philippines doing vis-a-vis our neighbors?
I mean, we don't do comparisons because
Okay.
it never really helps beyond a point, because you can't really say that there's torture in Indonesia, so therefore we should torture our people. I mean, you can't really make that case because it's a no-no. So,
Right.
but torture is a problem in many countries.
Alright.
The Philippines is generally seen as quite progressive on human rights. When they stand up in the international fora, you can be sure that Philippines say the right thing. But the question is, are they doing the right things? It's not a question of saying the right thing, it's a question of doing it.
So again, it's a matter of moving from
Yeah.
policy
From words to action.
to action.
Yeah.
And a very
Absolutely.
interesting talk, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time here.
No, my pleasure. It's very important. You guys are talking to a young audience, which is very important.
Hopefully, yeah, the young would actually understand as early.
One of the things I did want to mention, that often when we think about torture, we think that we are never going to be affected because it's not my brother or sister or father who's
It's
going to
very
be.
abstract, I
But
guess.
it could happen to anybody. In fact, a lot of the people who've been affected are not people who are particularly, you'd expect to be in these situations. If you have a police force whom you can't trust, we have deep trouble.
And that's also a problem of the PNP. Exactly, people don't see them as trustworthy because.
So, if they stop this practice, if there's clear conviction and there's a clear system on who do you complain to, there's more transparency, things will change.
Sorry, just going back to that, because I spoke to one of the a police official many months ago at the height of the Binyan Wheel of Torture scandal. He admitted that although the leaders know that this is the policy, it's hard to translate it to the SPO1s, to the PO1s, the PO2s of the world.
I mean, but it's true, of course, everything is nothing is easy.
Right.
But I do feel that if there's one thing the police force needs to do is to stop torture. And it'll improve their credibility, it'll improve their acceptability in the community. And I don't believe that you have to go around teaching people that torture is a bad thing. I mean, how can the police force not know?
Right.
They're doing it because they're getting away with it. So they have to stop getting away with it. We need convictions, we need accountability. It's as simple as that.
So convictions, that's one key thing that.
Yeah, which is the accountability and justice. So
yeah.
the victims are waiting for justice for years and years and years. In the last 5 years, after the new law is in place, there's not been a single case of a police official who has been brought to book. Not one.
Right, all pending cases.
Yeah.
Is that very frustrating for you? I mean,
It's frustrating for sure. It's not about us, because Amnesty is raising the issue, but think of the victims.
right.
Think of the people who are suffering from the torture. And I met several of them, and I wish people go and talk to these people directly, It's not just a question of, that's why I'm feeling that the people of the Philippines need to get more engaged, and younger people. Actually find out more, understand it more, talk to these people, and put pressure on the police station in your area to change the way they behave.
So a very localized approach. not
Action is
necessarily
needed, yeah.
From Cranley. Again, sir, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
For spending time with Rappler. The Philippine Police Force has much more room to improve in the area of respecting the rights of crime suspects and witnesses. We've been talking to Amnesty International Secretary General Salil Shetty. I'm Bea Cupin, and thank you for watching. Thanks for your time, sir.